Hi friends, how are you? My name is Nicole and this is Crimes with Cole. So, hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you guys all are having an amazing day. I hope you guys are ready for another crazy true crime story. I'm sure you have heard of this case, but I just find it wild. In today's case, we will be talking about Michele and Greg Williams and how she just could not keep her lies straight enough to get away with the murder of her husband. Michele was born and raised in Hurst, Texas, and she, along with her little sister, had lived with their father, who was a rather, shady man. He had some, con artist behaviors, and he was just not someone who you'd trust to do right by you. And naturally, Michele picked up on that behavior and thought that it was normal to act this way. Michele had attended LD High School but ended up dropping out at the age of 17 because she ended up getting pregnant. The baby's actual father was a boy named John Paul Ray. However, Michele had told a different boy named Kenneth O'Brien that the baby was his. So Kenneth actually ended up marrying Michele shortly thereafter, and they raised their baby, the best that they could at that age. Kenneth ended up joining the military for financial purposes for the family, and because of that, they ended up moving around quite a bit. But the love between the two had shortly fizzled away as Michele had reconnected with a guy that she had gone to middle school with. His name is Brandon Dixon. Naturally, the marriage fell apart, but it didn't bother Michele too much because she had Brandon on her radar. Brandon was absolutely blinded by love. Couldn't see Michele's lies and manipulations, and the two actually ended up having 2 children of their own together. And that's when Brandon really started to see Michele's true colors and just how much of a professional liar she truly was. He actually had found out right before he and Michele were due to get married that she still legally was married to Kenneth, which I mean, that's a problem if you're trying to get married to someone. Brandon had confronted Michele about this, and she simply told Brandon that Kenneth was abusive to her, and she was too scared to send him divorce papers, and yet she was too embarrassed to tell anyone about how awful their relationship was. So she just left and didn't mention it to anyone. And of course, Brandon, he loved her and he wanted to believe her, so he did. He still questioned a lot of it and was suspicious because it didn't quite make sense, but he tried to just accept her reasoning. Now, during this time, Michele had a job as a dental assistant, but Brandon was really suspicious about that as well, and just how much she was working. If she truly was working or just pretending to go so she could just, be off somewhere else. But Michele had shockingly let her family know that she quit her job at the dental office. So now she had this new job working nights as a telemarketer. However, Michele didn't actually quit her job. She was fired because she was caught stealing from the dental office. So now Brandon is more suspicious than ever about Michele and her actual whereabouts because she's working this night position as a telemarketer. He had ended up asking Michele for the phone number to her work, just in case of an emergency. If something happened to him or the kids, and, he just needed to get a hold of her and couldn't reach her by herself. And I'm pretty sure, it's a pretty normal request, in my opinion, to want to know your spouse's work number, especially when you have kids, in case of an emergency. So she gives him the number to her work, except it wasn't the telemarketing company she claimed she had been working at. It was a topless bar, which was in fact the actual place she had been working at, which is very, I'm not sure why you are going to tell your significant other or spouse or, whatever, that you work at this telemarketing company at nights, but then turn around and voluntarily give them the number to a topless bar, which is where you actually work. Do you see how that's like, you just put yourself out there. You just were caught in a whole bunch of lies. Naturally, Brandon called the number and discovered all of this and went to the bar himself to confront Michele about why she was working there and why she lied about it. And as you can imagine, Michele was not happy about this. And Brandon told her, you can leave with me now and you can come home, or you can stay here and never see your kids again. So Michele decided to go home with Brandon that night because, she didn't want to lose her kids. Brandon's suspicion of Michele only grew from that point. He felt she was cheating on him, as I think most of us would if we caught our wives secretly working in a topless bar. So he decides he wants to try to catch her and sets up recording devices in the house. It turns out Michele had been cheating on him with 2 different men and their family home. And when Brandon found out about this, he told Michele he wanted a divorce. However, Michele, instead of being apologetic and feeling ashamed of what she had done, she decided that she was going to seek revenge. So first, she decided to drain Brandon's saltwater aquarium, killing thousands of dollars worth of fish. It was a hobby of Brandon's to collect these saltwater fish. Then she takes it up a notch and poisons Domino, his Dalmatian, who he loved dearly. So then she took the dog to the vet, but convinces the vet that Domino needed to be put down. So they did. They put the dog down. Like, that is how spiteful this woman is. Naturally, Brandon files for divorce after this, as anyone in their right mind would. And Michele just kind of happily moves on and decides that she's going to reconnect with her high school fling named John. Now, remember, Michelle's baby she had in high school was actually from a guy named John and not Kenneth, but she lied to Kenneth and said it was his. So that is who John is. So things were going great with the two until they weren't. And John started to, like the rest of them, get suspicion that Michele is being unfaithful and decided to go through her purse, to see if maybe she was hiding something in there. And she was. He found a receipt for a dog collar, whipped cream, and cherries, along with a note that said, "Buy birthday card for Greg." Now, it is noteworthy to say that Michele never married John. She was just with him for about 8 years. But back in the day, that fell under common law marriage. Nowadays, they don't do that. But it was a decent amount of time being with this man. But before Michele decides to leave, she just needs to inflict a little bit of misery onto John's life. So I'm sure you can only imagine what she does. She decided that she would have a garage sale while he was gone. Luckily, he had returned to the house to retrieve his stuff, and now Michelle's fixated on Greg. Greg had been married twice before and had a child from a previous marriage. He and Michele had met in 2007 in an online BDSM community chat room. Their first date was Michele, Greg, and Greg's brother all attending this swingers club. And you probably guessed right if you guessed that by the end of the night, things got a little wild and Michele ended up performing sexual acts on Greg in front of everyone, including his brother. Oh, I just feel like if I was Greg, that would be so uncomfortable. Which, but this is very common. It is very common to perform acts on other people while people, are around watching. Like, it's a part of the thrill of going to places like that. If you're into that, and if you are, that's fine. For me personally, that I would be very uncomfortable. However, it is just important to make note that this was their first date. And Michele was very much so the type of woman that used her sex appeal and used sexual acts to get what she wants. Overall, though, like throughout her relationships, that was her main technique, to manipulate men, which works for some women, and they can get a lot of men that way. They can get a lot of things from men that way. Now, Greg's daughter's name is Taylor, and Greg's ex-wife, Taylor's mother's name is Kathy. And for the most part, Greg and Kathy got along. They co-parented very well. For the sake of Taylor, they put her needs first and did not use her as a pawn to, get back at one another like some divorced couples do. However, when Michele came into the picture, Kathy just had this strong gut feeling that Michele was no good. As Michele and Greg's relationship grew, so did the jealousy Michele had towards Greg's 12-year-old daughter, Taylor. She could not stand how much time and attention Greg gave his own daughter when she was around. And Kathy noticed this too. She could just tell Michele didn't like it. So what did Michele do? To make sure that she stayed in Greg's spotlight, she decided to tell Greg and Kathy that Taylor had a drug problem, which Greg and Kathy both, doubted this. But ironically, to back up this claim, Michele ended up in the hospital for ingesting opiates. She said that Taylor put them in her coffee, and she was in the hospital for 2 days because of it. So Taylor was sent off to a drug rehab facility at the age of 12. And there wasn't any evidence that Taylor did drugs or had drugs in her system. She was just simply sent off to this rehab program at this facility to cure a problem that they claimed she had. I would be livid if I was her mother, like absolutely livid. But, nonetheless, life carried on, and Michele and Greg decided they wanted to have a baby together. So they had a little girl, and they named her Michaela. Now, by this time, they are living in a very, very nice area of town called Keller, Texas. Very safe, extremely low criminal rate, like if any at all. The worst crime committed is probably rolling through a stop sign. It's a very nice area for a family to raise their children. And they were living a very nice life. Almost like a dream to some. Michele lived her life on no budget. She was constantly buying herself nice, expensive things. And their daughter. I'm talking like designer items, luxury items, like for her and the little girl. They drove matching Mercedes and really just seemed to be like that couple and that family from the outside looking in. They would throw all sorts of parties at their, luxurious big house and just, really presented themselves as this fun, outgoing, rich people who wanted everyone to have a great time. Michele's 2 older sons would visit frequently. They're grown by this time, and while they loved their mother, they really were fond of her, but they weren't fond of Greg. They just felt he was this arrogant bully and just didn't care for him, which I think in their situation of having a revolving door of men coming in and out of their lives growing up, they probably had a good gut feeling about men that their mother dated. And, Michele, she just sort of seemed to have moved on with her life. Almost like she was starting over. She, found this man who would give her this lifestyle she always wanted. She goes off, she has a new baby with him, and sort of set her life up the way she had always wanted it. And in the process of that, she kind of forgot her old lifestyle. But Greg had his own IT company called DFWIT Pro. And while it was rather successful, it was not successful enough to be paying for the lifestyle Michele insisted on having. I mean, her spending habits were just like of another tax bracket. She did not know any limits. She would just put it all on credit cards. Get a new one when that one was maxed out, which we are all aware of just how easy it is to go buy things on a credit card. You swipe, right? And Michele was also conveniently Greg's bookkeeper at this company. So she was well aware of the finances and actually manipulated the numbers so that Greg thought they were financially better off than they actually were. Greg at one point decided to buy Michele this yogurt shop, kind of like a little project, a little hobby, just something to keep her busy. I'm not sure why she wanted it so bad because she barely spent any time running it, but they also owned a weight training gym, which they both were rather passionate about fitness, actually. And usually, you have the same people coming to the gym to work out, kind of creating like this little gym family. And one of those that came to their gym regularly was Jean Wallace. Michele had met Jean at one of their parties they were throwing at their house. Jean was a friend of her son's and was significantly younger, but really into fitness. And Michele wanted him. I mean, she wanted this younger, good-looking fitness expert. And from the outside looking in, it did not look like Michele and Greg were in the danger zone of infidelity. I mean, they had it all. So why would Michele, why would she go after that guy? Michele had the life she had always dreamed of. So if she was having an affair with Jean, Greg was just oblivious to it. The two of them had a lot to look forward to. On October 12th of 2011, they were getting ready to close on this home they were building. And Greg he had all sorts of visions for this house, where the pool was going to be, what kind of backsplash was going to look best in the kitchen, and the walk-in closet accommodating all of their clothes, a huge master bath, and just all the great nights he and Michele would have in there. I mean, he was so excited for this house, and he really wanted an aquarium in this house. We are well aware Michele doesn't have the best history with men who own aquariums. I mean, this was going to be their dream home. But only 2 days later, on October 13th, 2011, Michele had rang the Keller Police Department frantically, telling them how her husband had just been killed. She had first told the police that she and Greg were up late at night talking about this new house, and they ended up falling asleep on the couch. But she heard a loud noise coming from the bedroom that woke her up. So she rushed to the bedroom, and when she walked into the bedroom, she was immediately struck in the face with a wrench, which knocked her to the ground. But she was able to glance and see a man in all black, then grabbed Greg's gun and shot him in the temple with it. When police arrived, they found Michele sitting on her front porch crying. The police had thoroughly checked all the area, the house, the yard, some surrounding area, to see if they could find the intruder that they were told had entered the home by Michele. Within an hour, police, detectives, and forensic analysis were all at this house. However, her daughter was still fast asleep on the couch. The same couch that Michele had fallen asleep on and later found Greg lying lifeless in their bed. Now, Michele and Greg's bedroom had these double doors that led to the backyard, and right outside of those doors, they found a .45 caliber gun, a shell casing, and a metal wrench. What they were unable to find or detect was any signs of forced entry. There were some scratches on the back door, but the bolt and lock themselves were untampered with. So at this point, the story Michele had told the police is not really lining up with what they're finding. But then they find an empty bottle of Clorox wipes. So their suspicion immediately skyrockets, and they decide to bring Michele in for questioning, but not as a suspect. So she has the right to leave at any moment. It's in the wee hours of the morning, or at least, Michele has been up since the wee hours of the morning, like 4 a.m., and now she's being questioned by police at the police department about her husband's death, which lasted about 5 hours or so, and nothing she is saying is adding up. They have found no fingerprints anywhere, not on the gun, not on the wrench, not on the door that, this intruder supposedly came through. Nowhere. There's no fingerprints anywhere. So it was very obvious she used those Clorox wipes to wipe something up. They also looked at the neighbor's security footage and determined there were no new cars that had been in that area during that time. So the detective questioning Michele was just so baffled on how someone could have broken in, gone into the house, because Michele was hell-bent on her story that this intruder came into the house and did this, but there was no sign. They could not find anything to support the claim that an intruder had gotten in. Michele had told them that she had kept a key hidden outside by the grill near the back door, which, it's very common, or at least it used to be really common back in the day to have a hidden key, in case someone needed to get into your house, let the dog out or whatnot. The detective just wasn't buying this. He wasn't buying anything Michele was saying. And so he decided he was going to tell Michele about a case he had worked one time. And during this supposed case that he had worked, there was a husband and a wife. And the husband had committed, he had taken his own life. But the wife cleaned up and slightly staged the scene so that she was able to collect his life insurance policy. Michele told them no. She was sticking to her original story that an intruder came in, until she finally caved and told the detective that they were correct and that truly is what happened. It's a very interesting tactic to use to get the truth from someone. It was what Michele, she ran with. Her news story now was that her and Greg had stayed up until around 1 a.m. talking about this house. This is when she decided it was time to go to bed. She said she saw Greg take at least 3 Tylenol PM pills before she went to sleep. 2 hours later, she was woken up by their daughter. So she and the daughter go to the living room, snuggle up on the couch, and they end up going back to sleep. But Greg was still awake at this time. She had asked Greg if there was anything that he needed, and he said no, he just wanted to be left alone because he didn't feel good. So Michele just goes to the living room, gets on the couch with her daughter, and falls back asleep. Shortly thereafter, she was awoken by what sounds like a gunshot. She rushes back to the room where Greg was, and then soon discovers that he took his own life. She then panics and decides that she does not want their daughter to discover that, her dad had taken his own life. So Michele decides to stage the crime scene and make it look like someone came in and took his life. She first wipes down Greg's hands with Clorox wipes and then dries them off with toilet paper to get rid of any gunshot residue. Then she took another Clorox wipe and wiped off the gun and placed it by the back door. Now, investigators thought that this was all complete BS. Michele claims, she did all of this rather quickly because she was hoping that the paramedics could arrive in enough time to save Greg's life. So after Michele had placed the gun by the back door, she then calls 911, and while the paramedics are on their way, she decides to take a screwdriver and start scratching at the back door to make it look like there was an intruder. She then goes into the garage and gets a wrench, and she takes this wrench and she smacks herself in the side of the face so hard that it swells up and just bruises the side of her face, making it look like an intruder had came in and hit her. Now, Michele claims that her daughter was sleeping peacefully on the couch during this entire time. So after Michele had this confession to the detectives, they then arrested her for filing a false police report. But they still felt like something wasn't right. But, the story aligned more with what they had found evidence-wise than what her original story was. When it had gotten out to Greg's family and friends that he had taken his own life, they didn't believe it. Like, his mother and his ex-wife, Kathy, especially, did not think that Greg would ever do such a thing, because a year prior to all of this, his best friend, Greg's best friend, had actually taken his own life. And it really hit him hard. It put him into a deep depression. And, he had always said that taking your own life was kind of, like a chicken's way out, which I think a lot of people say that. So, to each their own, you can feel how you feel. But so his family and friends just absolutely did not think that him taking his own life was in the cards for him. There was no depression. There was no issues there was nothing that would point him to doing that. And then, not to add that Michelle's behavior afterwards was quite questionable. The day after his passing, she went over to her mom's house and she didn't speak a word of Greg. Which, some people don't want to talk about it, but the day after, I think you just kind of, you're in a state where it just comes out. It's coming out. There is no, I don't know, but I would just think that it would be like word vomit, and you're just sitting there repeating yourself over and over again, like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. But she didn't. She didn't speak a word of it. It's a tragic event that just happened to you in life, and you're just, but Michele she wasn't like that. She just kind of kept her demeanor together, which was very odd. And what was even more odd was that she had spent the night at her sister's that night and woke up the next morning eager to go to IHOP, which you would think after losing your husband to him taking his own life, you're not really eager for anything except for him to come back. Then Michele had quickly gotten in contact with her lawyer to have an $8,000 check written to her so that they could pay attorney fees. Also, she started selling off all of their assets, which is just, that's odd to start doing within the first couple of days. This is within the first couple of days, not a year later, the first couple of days of his passing. And she had sold their yogurt business on Craigslist for $50,000. And then she sold Greg's IT business, which was rather successful, for $8,000. She then got in their BMW with their daughter and took a week-long vacation and was just having a nice, relaxing, great time. Not what a typical grieving wife would be. It was just odd. It was very odd behavior for a grieving wife to be acting that way. So then Michele gets in contact with one of her sons, Andrew. And she tells Andrew that there was indeed an intruder. And that's actually how Greg had passed. But she lied and told the police another story because that's what they wanted to hear. And Andrew had no reason to not believe his mother, so he believed her. Michele then asked Andrew if he and a couple of his buddies could help her frame Greg's ex-wife, Kathy, for Greg's murder. This is because Michele truly believes that Kathy had something to do with Greg's murder, but she couldn't prove it. In order to provide this proof, she told Andrew that she would need him to get an extra large hoodie and then fire some gunshots so the gunshot residue would be on the hoodie. He would need to take that hoodie and plant it in Kathy's car under the seat. So that would mean that Andrew and his buddies would have to break into Kathy's car to plant this hoodie. Then one of them would have to go to the payphone, call the police anonymously, and tell them about the hoodie in Kathy's car. So the police would find the hoodie, they would link it to Kathy, she would be arrested for the murder of Greg. Michele thought this was a brilliant plan. I mean, it was bulletproof in Michelle's mind. But Andrew, he had a little bit of a different thought on this. He thought this was stupid. He thought there's no way you're going to get away with this. This is dumb. I'm not doing this. I'm not partaking in this plan. I'm not framing Kathy. Michelle took matters into her own hands and decided that she was going to cash in on Greg's life insurance policy. Now, depending on which life insurance policy you have, there are certain stipulations, and dependent upon what the real cause of death is, it could disqualify you from obtaining the amount of life insurance on that particular person. So usually when you take your own life, that it's not necessarily one where you get paid out unless you have a policy for years and years and years. And in Greg's case, he had 3 life insurance policies for less than 2 years. Each of the policies all stated that if suicide was committed within the first 2 years, the policy would not pay out. 2 of the policies were for $150,000 each, and the third policy was for $500,000. So that's a grand total of $800,000 in life insurance money that Michelle was going to be get paid. But the insurance company felt like something wasn't right. They actually ended up calling the police department and just kind of, I guess, wanting to know a little bit more in regards to Greg and his death, because nothing was adding up. And just also to kind of, I think, low-key alert the police that Michelle was inquiring about his life insurance policy. Now, after the medical examiner had done their thorough examination of Greg, it came back that Greg was indeed murdered by a single gunshot wound to the temple. His cause of death was indeed a homicide and not suicide. So now that left the police questioning who really took Greg's life. They had looked back at the evidence that they had obtained from Michelle that night, and the jacket she was wearing did indeed have gunshot residue on it. And while she was the one who was cleaning up the scene, the gunshot residue could have been transferred to her jacket that way. There was such an overwhelming amount, though, that it only left one other option, which was that Michelle was responsible for Greg's death. On January 9th, 2012, while Michelle was walking into Lifetime Fitness, she was arrested on 3 charges of murder, tampering with evidence, and filing a false police report. Her bond was originally set to $520,000, but it quickly dropped to $82,000, and she was bailed out 8 days later. Now, while she was awaiting her trial, Michelle started a new life. And she found her new man, Gene Wallace. Remember? The fitness guy. Oh my God. Michelle. She's so fast. Now, Michelle and Gene ended up moving in with one another and opening up a kettlebell fitness business. And she changed her name to Shelly Williams. And the business actually did pretty well. I don't think anybody really in the area seemed to connect Michelle Williams with Shelly Williams, despite Greg's death, but, it kind of hit news in that area, but they didn't really connect everything. Almost 2 years later, on October 9th, 2013, is when Michelle's trial had started. And instead of gambling the odds and having a jury, she decided to take a plea deal where she would serve 18 years for deadly conduct and tampering with evidence. But being the pathological liar she is, she told the judge that she was pregnant with twins. So the judge had allowed her to remain on house arrest until after she gave birth, and it was estimated that she would give birth sometime in April 2014, and her sentence hearing would be scheduled after that. But in the meanwhile, Michelle would have to wear a GPS monitor to track all of her movement while she was on house arrest. So on January 30th, 2014, Michelle, should be rather pregnant, especially with twins. She's due to show up in court at this time, except when she showed up, she was not pregnant. And of course, she had a reason why, and it's she said it was because she had suffered a miscarriage around Christmas time. And I mean, whether or not that is true, I don't know. But they now knew that she wasn't pregnant, and she was able to start her sentence. A couple days later, on February 4th, 2014, Michele sat down with Fort Worth Star-Telegram newspaper and talked about the plea deal that she had taken. And during this interview, she basically said, she just kind of wants to get her sentence so she can start it and get it over with, right? Like, she took this plea deal so that she can just hurry up and get through this nightmare. And she's getting ready to go through it and get it done and over with. But on February 5th, 2014, she then sat down with the crew from 48 Hours and completely changed her story. She said that she basically was not guilty of any of this, and because of that, her plea deal was thrown out. So now she had to take the gamble with the jury. And on March 6th, Michele attended a volunteer hearing to determine if she would be waiting on the murder trial in jail or if she got to stay home. And at the hearing, the prosecution revealed evidence that while Michele was previously on house arrest while she was allegedly pregnant, she did tamper with her GPS monitoring device because she was pregnant. And sometimes, you swell up a little bit when you're pregnant sometimes. So Michele had asked them to loosen up the device around her ankle, and they did. And while they were reviewing the data, they found out that 26 out of 30 days that Michele was being monitored, there was no movement whatsoever. So therefore, it was just sitting there for 26 days. And that was just in November. In December, it did not move for 23 out of 30 days. They did confirm that she was working at a strip club in November and December, and there was never any track record of her going to the doctors for pregnancy with twins. And I'm here to tell you that you definitely are going to the doctors when you're pregnant with twins. And the farther along you get, the more doctor visits you have. So because of that, the judge decided that Michele would await her trial without bond at Tarrant County Jail. That's going to bring us all the way to September 23rd of 2014 when her trial begins with the jury. And among many people that had testified, her son Andrew had testified. And it was at this point where Andrew had told the court and the jury that his mother wanted to frame Greg's ex-wife Kathy for his murder. Also, that his mother came up with this notion that her own son had killed Greg and wanted to frame him. And if that wasn't enough, the jury was also able to see the interrogation videos of Michele changing her story over and over and over again. She changed her story 6 different times. So after 6 days, the trial finally ended, and on September 29th, 2014, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury came back and convicted Michele on 1 count of murder and 1 count of tampering with evidence. She ended up being sentenced to 60 years in prison and won't be eligible for a parole hearing until she completes the first 30 years. And it is just crazy to me that, first of all, that you would want to frame your own son to get away with this murder, to be paid out on his life insurance. If the whole reason you did this was for the money, why? Because it's not like Greg wasn't making any. You guys were living a very lavish lifestyle. So I don't know why or what it was that she necessarily wanted that she couldn't get with Greg still being here. But I think it's a very clear indicator based upon her previous relationships that she was willing to do what it took to put herself first and make sure her own needs were met. But, that's just my opinion. But that is all I have for today. Please let me know what you guys think. And until next time, Please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.